So let's raise the big questions right at the very top. India's mission to label Pakistan a terror state, is it working on the ground or not? Do MP delegations really deliver? Are these MP delegations just a photo op and a PR exercise? Who is really winning this war of narratives? Those are the questions I will raise tonight. Joining me now, Ambassador Vivek Kaju, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Also joining me, Brahma Chalani, Strategic Affairs expert. We also hope to be joined by Daniel Block, Senior Editor at Foreign Affairs Magazine and Contributing Editor to the Washington Monthly. I appreciate all of you joining us. I want to come to you, Mr. Kaju, first. What's your sense in the last few days, this diplomatic offensive, MPs being sent across the world, External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar giving a series of interviews now to foreign channels? Is it working, or do you believe that this should have happened much earlier and therefore it is a bit of a missed opportunity?
No, I do believe it should have happened earlier, but it was important for us at this stage also to tell the world that it is not only important to acknowledge Pakistan as a state which breeds terrorism, which uses terrorism as an instrument of policy, which has made terrorism a part of its strategic doctrine, but that India has no alternative but to respond to Pakistani terror through kinetic means. That the days which stretched over a quarter of a century when India was expected to absorb Pakistani terror are over. And therefore, the real message that we are sending the world is that it must put pressure on Pakistan to abandon the path of terror. It's not an easy a thing to achieve, but we must try that because
But how
the
is it different how is it different, Mr. Kaju, from what we've done in the past? You've been a secretary in the government of India. You've looked closely at the AFPAC and the Pakistan desk. What is different in the messaging now compared to the past? And the world didn't listen to us then. Will they listen now?
look after 1998, after the tests, it was my experience that the world focused not on Pakistan's initial terrorism as an escalatory measure, but on our response. Today, we are telling the world, and this is something that, if you permit me, I've been writing for a good 10 years, that the original, and these are the terms that I'm happy Vikram Misra used now, that the original escalation between nuclear states lies in a provocative act like a terrorist attack. And if you permit me one more sentence, Rajdeep, throughout the Cold War, the Soviets and the Americans played all kinds of games through their proxies. And these games included the proxies targeting the soldiers, each other's soldiers, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan. But never did these two superpowers, these nuclear powers, play games on each other's territory. The closest it came to a real crisis was in 1962 in Cuba, and what is not so well known in 1987 when NATO launched what was called the Able Archer exercise. Apart from that, they refrained from provocation on each other's territory. Pakistan has turned that nuclear doctrine which developed in Europe and in the United States and the West on
Right.
its head. And it started using nuclear weapons as a shield. And the world came to us and said, "You are big boys. We will try to do everything we can to get Pakistan off the terror disease. But please, it's too dangerous. It's escalatory, so don't respond kinetically." Now, what has happened is we've said that below the nuclear threshold, there is space for kinetic action. And that is why the terminology being used by the government, which the Prime Minister began, was to say, we will not succumb to nuclear blackmail, which means we've not developed proxies We don't have a Lashkar-e-Taiba or a Jaish-e-Mohammed-like organization which can undertake terrorism in Pakistan. So what do we? The only thing that we can do is use
Right.
kinetic action, and we will use that. That is the challenge
Okay.
before us, to
Uh,
tell one last sentence, to tell the world that, look, please put pressure on Pakistan, that escalation lies in their terrorism, not in our response.
You heard Professor Brahma Chelani, Vivek Kaju give that rather detailed explanation of how India's diplomatic offensive is moving. But the fact is, do you believe, Professor Chelani, that Pakistan is being cornered by the kind of diplomatic offensive that we've launched? Or do you believe Pakistan will get away with it yet again?
Let me be frank, Rajdeep. India won the battle but lost the narrative. Indian strikes achieved the objective of imposing costs without triggering an all out war. India effectively pierced the perceived immunity conferred by Pakistan's nuclear deterrent. By the end of the 3-day war, Indian airstrikes had tripled major Pakistani air bases, including Nur Khan and Balari, without suffering any confirmed retaliatory damage. In fact, this 3-day conflict exposed the vulnerabilities of the Chinese weapon platforms on which Pakistan relied. But India failed to translate its short term victory into achieving the larger goal of advancing the overall struggle against a rogue neighbor that exports terrorism. And losing the international narrative holds significance. It signifies failing to influence the broader international perception and understanding of the core issue being Pakistan's cross border terrorism. That core issue triggered
But
the
what could
recent
India,
military.
Professor, what could India, Brahma, what could India have done that they didn't do? What could India have done that they didn't do, in your view, which now perhaps they are attempting to do with this diplomatic offensive?
The thing is that the core issue has fallen by the wayside. Why did India lose the international narrative? There are two reasons for it. One reason is that successive Indian governments have focused narrowly on shaping the domestic narrative, thereby ceding the international narrative by default. Operation Sindoor is merely the latest example. Sending delegations of MPs abroad was the equivalent of seeking to close the stable door after the horse had bolted. That is, after the global narrative had already hardened. The second reason is that, in keeping with India's bureaucratic culture, India often responds too slowly, allowing others to define the narrative first. India needs to remember that to shape
No, but what
international
is this
opinion.
narrative? Brahma, allow me to challenge. No, but Brahma, allow me to challenge you. The fact is, when you say that we've lost the narrative, how have we lost the narrative? I mean, the world surely knows and acknowledges Pakistan-based cross-border terrorism. This is not something new. It's been going on for 3 decades. Are you telling me that the world needs to wake up now and the narrative has suddenly been lost by India on terrorism?
There is a broad and widely accepted international consensus, backed by numerous international reports, intelligence assessments, and historical events, that Pakistan has provided support, sanctuary, and training to various terrorist groups. We're talking about Operation Sindoor and how it was portrayed internationally. We have to remember that Pakistan was quick to spread empty boasts and even outright lies, including that it downed 5 Indian warplanes on the first day of the conflict. That claim was picked up and highlighted by the international media because there was no quick Indian rebuttal. We all know that Trump announced a ceasefire ahead of India or Pakistan. But to respond to Trump's boast that he brokered the ceasefire, India took 2 full days. By then, the world had come to believe that the US mediated an end to the military hostilities. And the Indian response to Trump's statement that he used the threat of trade suspension to force India's hand came after 3 days. India has to remember that in public diplomacy, time is of the essence. To shape international opinion, India must act swiftly by issuing timely statements and rebuttals to counter disinformation. The irony is this, Rajdeep, that India framed Operation Sindoor in powerful symbolism as Indian women avenging the murder of 26 husbands. But that powerful symbolism was not backed up by a proactive public diplomacy to shape the international narrative through timely statements and rebuttals. What can delegations of MPs do now when the international narrative has already hardened?
Has the international narrative, Daniel Block, hardened? Are you getting a sense that the world already has taken sides, or do you believe that Brahmachalani is being a little unfair to India, saying we were a little late with telling the world exactly how we were the victims yet again of a terror attack from Pakistan?
I don't know if hardened is the word that I would use, but I do think that much of the world has moved beyond this and are now focusing on other things, which is to say that the conflict and the fighting between India and Pakistan is obviously a huge story in both of those countries. But in Washington, at least, it's not the dominant news item. It slipped not just kind of off the front pages of newspapers, but more or less out of the news altogether. I think it's important to remember that the United States never really wanted to get involved in this conflict. And I think that's true for a lot of other stories as well. A lot of other states as well. To the extent that they did get involved, it was because they were mostly concerned about nuclear escalation. These are two nuclear armed states that are fighting each other. Now, that's not to say that in various corners of Washington, people aren't thinking about this anymore. Of course they are. It's not to say that the US government won't still be more involved in this than it was before. I think they probably will be, largely out of concerns of nuclear escalation. But I do think that we're moving beyond that. And we're less concerned now with questions of who won or who lost, who's the victim and who isn't. I do think there will be continued focus on trying to get Pakistan to support terrorist actors less, with a recognition that the Pakistani government is very complex and often the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. But it's not a huge story anymore here in the United States.
It's not a huge story anymore in the United States. Remember, Shashi Tharoor is leading that delegation to the United States and countries in the Western, in that part of the world. Dr. Tharoor has always been very articulate making his statements, but is it again the question too little, too late? And does it really make that kind of impact? Listening to what Shashi Tharoor said only today when he was in Guyana, when he spoke to the Guyanese leadership there. This is Shashi Tharoor on Pakistan. Listen in.
There was certainly a desire on the part of the terrorists to provoke communal tensions in India between the Hindu and Muslim communities. That failed spectacularly. All communities rallied around in a very united manner. And what was again very effective was that in the briefings that the Indian government and the Indian military gave every day during these 4 days of conflict, two of the military officers doing the briefing were women officers, and one of them was a Muslim, which sent a very clear message to the world, or anyone who was watching, that this is not about Hindu-Muslim or anything like that. This is about terrorism and terrorist enablers versus democratic India.
Okay, let me go straight with that to you, Vivek Kaju. You're hearing Shashi Tharoor there, articulate as ever, speaking about the fact that this terror attack was designed to stir a Hindu-Muslim divide. Now, do you need a Shashi Tharoor to do that, to go to Guyana, to go to South America, to go to the US to make this point heard loud and clear? Or could our diplomats have done it on their own? What does this say about the state of Indian diplomacy, that we need to send our MPs in these all-party delegations to make these points? Or are these, as the cynics say, mere photo ops?
Look, Rajdeep, I won't get into the politics of this. I've been a diplomat and I'll respond to you in terms of diplomacy. Obviously, there's a political element apart from the diplomatic significance of an all-party delegations going and meeting interlocutors. But I'll take off from what Mr. Block said. Terrorism is no longer an international priority. It is low down in terms of global priorities. The priority today is how to deal with Trump and his erratic policies and the overarching China-US rivalry. What the world is concerned with and Mr. Block mentioned that, is escalation. Our challenge at the moment is how to ensure that the international strategic community understands that the escalation process between nuclear states begins with a terrorist attack, which is completely unacceptable, as the Pahalgam attack was. That is going to be a long term process. I wish the government had begun this process many, many years ago. I wish that our strategic community had started writing about it. We fell into the trap, and
No,
our
but it's not
strategic
just that,
community.
Mr. Karju, if I may, Mr. Karju, if I may intervene, look, in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, Pakistan was moved out of the FATF grey list. Should we have protested much more strongly at the IMF? While the IMF loans may not be linked specifically to what a country does when it comes to terror, surely we could have made our voice heard loud and clear. Are you saying these were all missed opportunities? Should we have
No,
kept the heat on Pakistan for a much longer period?
no, because we are in a bit of a bind. And the bind is that the international community does not want a nuclear Somalia. Pakistan has over 220 million people, it has nuclear weapons, and the world simply cannot contemplate an unstable Pakistan. Therefore, our task is to ensure that the world puts pressure on Pakistan, and that's a long term process. And the Pakistan government, as Mr. Block said, is a complex government. But I think if the international community, if the major powers understand what we are saying, as they should, because otherwise we will use kinetic action, and that is something that we made it clear. Now,
Sir,
as far as
no, but
one
Mr.
last
Karju,
sentence.
Mr. Karju, I'm just showing images of the Pakistan Prime Minister with the Turkish President Erdogan.
He is
We've
with,
seen we know Pakistan's strong relationship with China. Given all that, when you say the world community will come together, there are countries which are simply unwilling to call Pakistan out because of their
look,
close alliances.
yes, but if countries of the European Union, the major powers, if the United States were to tell the Chinese, the Turks don't matter, quite frankly, Iran doesn't matter in this, Azerbaijan and Tajikistan, these are the four countries Shehbaz Sharif is visiting, they really don't matter. But if the Americans were to have a straight dialogue with China to say that, look, the Indians have lost patience and it's getting too dangerous and you better rein in your allies or your vassals or whatever you may call them, that they can't use terror anymore. My last point, I think uh, I have great respect for uh, Brahma's strategic vision, his knowledge on these affairs, but I think he's, if I may submit for his consideration, 2 points. One, when you are dealing with this erratic personality who, like Donald Trump, and you are engaged in trade discussions with him, you are engaged in matters with him which are vital to your economic interests and other interests, then there will always be a time lag between his statements and a government's response. That is the nature of how governments behave. I've been part of, in my diplomatic career, I have been part of government processes. It's not very easy. You can't, if Trump says something, you
Right.
can't come back with a snappy one liner immediately. You've got to think it carefully. And my second point is this: narrative building at the end of the day really is transient. It's of transient value. The real thing we've got to do is to change the strategic thinking in the strategic community of the West and other parts of the globe on escalation. That is the point I'm referring to
Okay.
again and again, because I
You're,
believe that is where
you
the
made
key
that
lies.
point earlier as well. You made that point and you made that
Yes.
strongly. I That's the point, Brahma. A lot of this is happening behind the scenes. You're saying India should have reacted instantly the moment Trump, in a way, tried to claim credit for the ceasefire, almost tried to internationalize Kashmir. In diplomacy, certain things have to be done behind the scenes. Brahma Chelani is the point, I think, that Mr. Kaju is making.
Ambassador Kaju makes a fair point. I was giving you examples of India's slow response. For example, the Pakistani claim on the first day of the conflict that it had downed 5 Indian warplanes. Wasn't that picked up by the international media? Wasn't that highlighted? Even today, just 2 days ago, I got a call from the editor of a well-respected international publication about this Pakistani claim. That claim hasn't been dispelled even today. But on the larger issue...
What if the claim is true? What if the claim is true, Brahma? We don't want to get into the claim. Maybe we want to focus focus only on the issue of terror.
Well, the Indian military, in its briefing, has mentioned that all Indian pilots returned home safely. And they have also pointed to Pakistan's record of making exaggerated claims that proved to be false later. But I think I want to come to the fundamental issue. You're mentioning the US. The real outcome from Operation Sindoor is the wake-up call India has got from the US. 2 successive US administrations, first Biden and now Trump, have sent a wake-up call to India that the US is not a reliable strategic partner of India. Biden was the one who initiated the bailout IMF packages for Pakistan, 2, actually, one after another. It is he who modernized and upgraded Pakistan's F-16 fleet against India. It is his administration that took the lead in helping Pakistan exit the FATF gray list. And now Trump has opened India's eyes. He has equated the terror-sponsoring state with the victim India. He has amplified the international focus on the Kashmir issue. Notably, Trump has remained silent on the root cause of the crisis, cross-border terrorism. He hasn't uttered a single word on that root cause of the crisis, while he has sought to portray Kashmir as the central dispute. And in fact, all this aligns with Pakistan's long-standing tactic of using the Kashmir issue as a smokescreen to legitimize its terror operations. I think when history is written, this Operation Sindoor will be seen as fundamentally shifting India's foreign policy toward strategic self-reliance.
I want to bring in Daniel Block on that to get a final word to what you heard from Brahma Chelani just now. It's the United States, in a sense, which has once again, like it or not, because of the way this is played out, hyphenated India and Pakistan. That's what many people fear. Do you believe those fears are justified, or do you believe the US does see India very differently to Pakistan, and maybe Brahma Chelani is exaggerating the impact that this Trumpian worldview will have on the subcontinent?
Well, I think with everything Trump-related, making forward-looking predictions is very difficult. And with that as a caveat, I'll give it my best shot. I think when it comes to Trump and Kashmir, you have a sense here that Trump loves to fashion himself as a great deal maker, as the great negotiator. And so I think there's a sense of personal ego that's probably tied up in his offers, in the past to mediate over Kashmir, or his sense that he could come to some sort of permanent solution over that. I think that that's played up in his own personal ego, and that most elements of the United States government don't think that that's true. When it comes to the question of hyphenating, I think the United States really would like to be closer to India still to deal with the threat from China. I think that that's probably where the US strategic community stands. But I do think that after this, the United States government probably has a sense that it needs to focus again more on the India-Pakistan relationship, because again, it's scared of escalation. It's scared of the fact that things might ramp up and that these are 2 nuclear armed states. And in terms of, who it blames, or seeing India as the victim and Pakistan as the aggressor, I think that there's absolutely a sense that the Pakistani government is doing a very bad job, to put it mildly, of dealing with terrorism that's emanating from within its borders. But I also think there are elements of the US government and the US foreign policy community more broadly that are worried about some of the hyper nationalism that's emanating from India. They worry that that's going to prompt more escalation than is necessary, that that could become quite dangerous and combustible. So I don't think they see it narrowly as one side is to blame, the other
Right.
is a clear victim. And I think that that's going to concern them, especially, again, I can't emphasize enough how much escalation is driving US involvement in this, the fear that this conflict could go nuclear.
I think that is the central fact that we've got out of this very educative conversation. The real worry for the world is, will this conflict escalate, and if next, to what level? The real concern for India is, what will the world do to stop Pak-based terror? And the question is, can we do enough to put terror above the fears that the West has over escalation? I thank all my three guests for joining me and giving us a sense of how this diplomatic war is likely to be waged in the months ahead. Thank you all very much for joining me.